The thing about working in academic administration for 17 years is that eventually you believe you have seen everything. Administrator StoryThe of the Velhari Coordination Cast, had processed 4,200 cadets through the intake halls of the Orion Rim Military Academy. I had handled a Dravani student who communicated exclusively through bioluminescent patterns and required special lighting installed in 3 different classrooms. I had managed the enrollment of a Hektar cadet whose species technically did not experience time in a linear fashion, which created extraordinary complications with assignment deadlines. I had even navigated, with considerable diplomatic grace, the year that 2 rival Centauri noble houses sent their heirs to the Academy simultaneously, and every corridor became a potential incident waiting to happen. I was, by any reasonable measure, unshakable. Then Marcus Vane walked through my door going the wrong direction. Not metaphorically. He had physically entered my office from the supply corridor that connected to the back of the building. A corridor that required a staff keycard, 2 biometric confirmations, and the deliberate override of a door that was clearly marked in 6 languages as restricted access. He was holding a cup of something hot and steaming, wearing his cadet uniform with the collar open in direct violation of dress code subsection 4.7. And he was looking at a campus map on his datapad with the focused expression of someone who had been lost for quite some time and had made peace with it. "Oh," he said, looking up and apparently noticing me for the first time. "Are you Administrator StoryThe? The directory said your office was on the east side of the building." "This is the east side," I said. "Huh." He looked at his datapad again. "My east or the building's east?" I stared at him for a long moment. "Those are the same direction, Cadet. Are they, though?" He pulled out a chair and sat down without being invited. "Because on my home planet we orient east toward the nearest large body of water. And there's an ocean about 400 kilometers that way." He pointed southwest. "So technically I've been consistently navigating by a perfectly logical system. It's just not your system." I wrote 3 things in my intake notes. First, Cadet Marcus Vane, human, age 22. Second, arrived via restricted supply corridor. Third, after a pause, request transfer to a different department. The transfer request was denied. Staffing issues. That was 5 weeks ago. Marcus Vane had spent those 5 weeks doing what I was beginning to understand humans simply did, moving through the structured, carefully maintained world of the Orion Military Academy like a stone dropped into still water, sending ripples in every direction without apparently intending to cause any of them. In week 1, he had discovered that the mess hall's nutrition synthesizer operated on a flavor profile algorithm that could be manipulated by entering dietary restriction codes in a specific sequence. He had not hacked it. He had not damaged it. He had simply read the technical manual, the full manual, all 340 pages of it. Apparently for fun, found a legitimate menu expansion function that had never been activated because no one had bothered to read that far, and used it to unlock a customization mode that the synthesizer's manufacturers had included and then forgotten about. Within 48 hours, 17 other cadets had learned the sequence from him. The mess hall was now producing food items from 12 different planets that had never previously appeared on the menu. Nutrition standards compliance was actually up. I had no grounds to formally object, and that bothered me more than if he had simply broken something. In week 2, he had befriended Security Unit 7. Unit 7 was a patrol drone, roughly spherical, equipped with scanning equipment and a non-lethal deterrent system. It was not designed for social interaction. It was not designed to have friends. Marcus had apparently spent an afternoon in the maintenance bay. He claimed he was lost, which I was no longer willing to rule out, and had spoken to Unit 7 while waiting for someone to let him out. He had, by his own account, simply talked to it. About nothing in particular. About Earth and starships and what it might be like to fly. Unit 7, whose behavioral matrix included a rudimentary interaction log, had tagged Marcus as a person of interest, friendly, and now made a slight deviation from its patrol route twice daily to pass his dormitory corridor. The head of security had reviewed the logs and found no violation. The drone was technically still patrolling. It had simply optimized its route in a way that happened to involve Marcus. "It likes me," Marcus had explained when I called him in to discuss it. "It is a machine," I had replied. "Sure," he had said, in a tone that suggested he did not entirely believe me. Week 3 had involved the language orientation incident, which I had documented extensively and then locked in a file I hoped never to open again. The summary was this: Marcus Vane, during the Cultural Sensitivity Seminar on Dravani Communication Customs, had attempted to respond to the instructor's bioluminescent demonstration using a pocket light he had modified for the purpose. He had, by pure statistical accident, produced a pattern that in formal Dravani translated roughly to, "I acknowledge your authority and offer my complete cooperation." The Dravani instructor, who had been teaching at the academy for 11 years and had never once received what she described as a genuinely proper formal greeting from a non-Dravani student, had been so moved that she had invited Marcus to a private cultural exchange session and written him a commendation. He had received a formal merit point for accidentally being respectful. I had reviewed the regulations 3 times. There was no rule against accidentally being respectful. Week 4 had been, by comparison, quiet. Marcus had merely reorganized the cadet common room's furniture arrangement, citing better conversational flow, and somehow convinced a mixed group of Velhari, Centaurine, Hektar, and Dravani cadets to spend an evening playing a human card game called poker, which had apparently generated more interspecies communication and cultural exchange than the previous semester's entire structured diplomacy curriculum. The Cultural Exchange Office had asked for his notes. He did not have notes. He had been improvising the entire time. It was therefore in a state of 5 weeks accumulated bewilderment that I found myself standing in the observation deck above the academy's primary simulation chamber on a Tuesday morning, watching Marcus Vane do something that our most experienced tactical faculty were finding very difficult to look at directly. The simulation he was running was called the Valdres scenario. It had been designed 14 years ago by a coalition of the Academy's most accomplished tactical minds as the capstone examination for advanced third-year students specializing in command track. It was not supposed to be in Marcus's queue. His cohort was scheduled for a basic navigation assessment somewhere in the scheduling system, in a clerical error that 3 different administrators had since claimed was not their fault. The Valdres scenario had been assigned to Marcus Vane's individual practice block with a difficulty setting of advanced, unrestricted. The scenario parameters were these: single command vessel, moderate damage, all support systems degraded, positioned in a contested system against an opposing force of 4 enemy warships with full combat capability. The objective was simple in theory and nearly impossible in practice: survive for 90 minutes while protecting a designated civilian installation. The record survival time was 1 hour and 22 minutes. Achieved by a Hektar tactical prodigy who now held a senior faculty position and had specifically asked not to be in the observation deck today. Marcus had been running for 1 hour and 58 minutes. "He should not be able to do that," said Lieutenant Avrika, my second in command, her feathered crest flat against her head in the way it went when she was trying to process something her brain was rejecting. She was pointing at the tactical display where Marcus had, 16 minutes ago, done something that had caused 2 of the senior instructors present to sit down heavily and not stand back up. He had surrendered, not actually surrendered. Marcus had broadcast a formal distress and surrender signal on all standard frequencies, which the simulation's enemy AI had been programmed to respond to by moving into a collection formation, Weapons powered down to minimal. Ships repositioning to escort a captured vessel. The protocol existed because the simulation was designed to model realistic engagement rules. And realistic engagement rules included the processing of surrenders. What? The simulation had not been designed to account for was a cadet who would use the 38 seconds of weapons down repositioning to conduct an extremely specific sequence of actions that he had apparently planned in advance. In those 38 seconds, Marcus had rerouted his damaged ship's remaining power into a single high-intensity sensor pulse, reprogrammed his vessel's automated distress beacons to broadcast on the enemy ship's internal communication frequencies with a signal pattern that mimicked a reactor failure alarm. And then, this was the part that had caused the sitting down, done nothing. He had simply waited. The enemy ships, receiving what their own systems identified as an internal reactor failure warning, had initiated automated safety protocols that briefly but completely disrupted their weapons lock. In that window, Marcus had moved his ship not away from them but between them and the civilian installation, using the confusion not to escape but to reposition. He used a surrender as a distraction, Avrika said, as though saying it aloud might help it make sense. He used a surrender, I agreed slowly, as a distraction to move closer to what he was protecting. On the screens, Marcus was talking to himself in the way humans apparently did under pressure. A rapid, quiet monologue that the observation deck's audio pickup caught in fragments. Okay, 2 ships left, no real weapons to speak of. But they're going to be annoyed about the reactor alarm thing once they figure it out. So maybe 30 seconds before they re-engage, and I've got the installation behind me, which is either great or terrible depending on. He is calculating, the Centaurian professor beside me said softly, his scales cycling through the colors that indicated fascination, suppressing alarm. Not panicking, calculating. Humans do that, I said. I had been learning this, especially when things are at their worst. Something in their neurochemistry, I understand. Pressure clarifies them. The 2 remaining enemy warships had sorted out that there was no actual reactor failure. Their weapons were coming back online. Marcus had maybe 20 seconds, and then the simulation stopped accepting our inputs entirely. Administrator. The young technician at the monitoring station turned around, with an expression that on a human I would have called terrified. The scenario is not responding to oversight commands. I straightened. Meaning what precisely? Meaning, she checked her display again, as if hoping it had changed. I cannot pause it. I cannot end it. I cannot adjust parameters. It is as if the simulation has decided it is no longer interested in being administered. On the screens, the scenario began to change. The civilian installation Marcus had been protecting flickered, shifted, and transformed into something else entirely, a military command structure of significant complexity, surrounded by reinforcing ships that had not been in the original scenario. The 2 remaining enemy vessels were joined by 6 more. The tactical situation went, in the span of about 15 seconds, from very difficult to mathematically impossible, through the audio feed. We heard Marcus Vane go quiet for a moment, then, Okay, is the simulation. Is it mad at me? Because it seems like it might be mad at me. I reached for the communication control. Cadet Vane, I said. And my own voice sounded, even to me, like someone who had already begun drafting their retirement paperwork. This is Administrator Sareth. There has been a malfunction. Please remain where you are. Oh hey, Administrator. He sounded, against all reason, almost relieved to hear a familiar voice. Quick question, totally unrelated to anything. Is the simulation supposed to add ships when you're winning? I looked at Avrika. Avrika looked at the technician. The technician looked at her display and said very quietly, The scenario impossibility rating has just exceeded every metric we have available to measure it. Marcus Vane's voice came through the speaker again, thoughtful and calm in the way that I had learned over 5 weeks. Meant he was already 3 steps into a plan that no one else had thought of yet. Because, he said, I think I have an idea. The observation deck had gone very quiet in the way that spaces go quiet when everyone present is afraid to say out loud what they are all thinking. What everyone was thinking was this: the most sophisticated training simulation in the Orion Military Academy's 63-year history had just decided, apparently of its own accord, that it was not finished with Marcus Vane. It had locked out every administrative override we possessed. It had rewritten its own scenario parameters mid-session. And the human sitting inside it, alone in an escape pod with failing life support and no weapons, had just said he had an idea. In my experience, those 4 words from Marcus Vane were the most dangerous combination in any language. Talk to me, I said to the technician, keeping my voice level with the kind of effort that does not come naturally. What are we looking at? Her tentacles moved across her console in rapid, anxious patterns. The simulation's core behavioral engine has entered a state I do not have a classification for, Administrator. It is not crashed. It is not frozen. It is, she paused, as though the next word required her to accept something she was not ready to accept, adapting. It appears to be analyzing everything Cadet Vane has done in the past 2 hours and generating counter-scenarios specifically designed to neutralize his approach. It is learning from him, the Centaurian professor said. His scales had settled into a deep, unblinking blue, which I had learned indicated a state somewhere between profound academic fascination and genuine existential concern. Training simulations do not learn, Lieutenant Avrika said firmly. This one, the technician replied, is doing it anyway. On the main display, the tactical picture had become something that bore almost no resemblance to the original Valdris scenario. 8 enemy warships had arranged themselves not in any standard combat formation, but in an adaptive encirclement pattern that shifted every 45 seconds, closing the escape routes in a sequence that suggested something was predicting where Marcus might try to go before he tried to go there. The installation he had been protecting was now fortified on the enemy side as well, transformed into a contested objective that sat at the center of the entire tactical nightmare like the point of a trap. Marcus's escape pod sat at the edge of it all. On the biomonitor feed, his heart rate was elevated but rhythmic. He was thinking. Open the channel, I said. The technician opened it. Cadet Vane. Still here, he said immediately. Still not dead, which I'm counting as a personal victory given the current situation. Administrator, I want to be transparent with you about something. I would appreciate that very much. When I was inside the ship, before the reactor detonation, I noticed that the enemy AI kept predicting my moves about 4 seconds before I made them. Which shouldn't be possible, right? Because the scenario II is supposed to work from observation data, and 4 seconds is too fast for observation. So I started looking at the simulation's response lag, and I realized it was accessing my command inputs before I confirmed them. It was reading my intentions from my preliminary entry keystrokes. The observation deck was silent. So, Marcus continued, I started entering false preliminary inputs, typing out one plan and then doing something completely different. And the AI started making mistakes because it was reacting to the thing I typed instead of the thing I did. And I think, he paused briefly, I think when I started deliberately feeding it false data, I accidentally made contact with something deeper than the tactical layer. Something that runs underneath the whole scenario architecture. I turned to the technician. She was already nodding, tentacles frozen above her console. That would explain the lockout, she said quietly. He did not hack the system. He created a feedback loop. The scenario engine registered his false input pattern as a novel tactical behavior it had never encountered, flagged it as an unclassified threat response, and escalated to a higher processing tier to analyze it. That higher tier has override authority over standard administrative commands. We are locked out because the simulation's own security architecture locked us out to protect the analysis process. He frightened the simulation, Avrika said. He surprised it, the Centaurian professor corrected. And I could hear the note of deep appreciation in his voice that I found both understandable and alarming. Which for a system designed to be unsurprisable is perhaps the same thing. Through the audio feed, Marcus spoke again. I can hear you talking. The pod's pickup is pretty good. I'm not trying to eavesdrop, the channel is open both ways, and my ears work. We are aware, I said. Cadet Vane, what is your current life support status? 41 minutes of oxygen. Give or take. The heating system is nominal, which is nice because space is famously cold. A brief pause. Administrator, I want to ask you something, and I need you to be straight with me. Ask, is there a version of this where you can just extract me? Override the simulation chamber's physical systems independently of the simulation software, and open the pod from the outside? I looked at the technician. She shook her head slowly. The pod's physical release mechanisms are integrated with the simulation's environmental controls, I said. While the scenario engine its current state, we cannot access them without risking triggering an emergency shutdown cascade that could damage the core systems. Yeah, he sounded like he had already worked this out. Okay, so I have to solve it from the inside. That appears to be the situation. Cool. The tone he used for that phrase I had learned indicated the opposite of how it sounded. It meant he was somewhere between alarmed and committed. Okay, here's what I'm thinking. The simulation has shifted into a mode where it's trying to beat me by anticipating me, right? That's why it added ships. That's why it transformed the objective. It is building a scenario it believes I cannot navigate based on everything I've done so far. That is our current understanding, yes. So it knows my tactics. It's cataloged every unconventional move I made, and it's generating an environment specifically designed to make those moves ineffective. Another pause. What it doesn't know is what I do when my tactics don't work. What do you do? I asked carefully. When your tactics do not work? I stop having tactics, Marcus said, and start having a conversation. The observation deck went quiet again. This time it was a different kind of quiet, the kind that happens when something is said that everyone hears, but no one is quite sure they understood correctly. The simulation's higher processing tier. Marcus continued, and his voice had shifted into the focused, rapid cadence I had learned to associate with him being 3 moves ahead of everyone else in the room, is an analytical architecture. Its job is to understand novel behavior and classify it. Right now it's classified me as an unresolved tactical variable, which is why it's still running. It can't close the scenario because it hasn't finished analyzing me. It won't close until it reaches a conclusion about what I am. You are proposing, the Centaurian professor said, leaning toward the microphone before I could stop him, to give it that conclusion deliberately. Professor Nerok? Marcus sounded pleased. I didn't know you were up there. I came to observe what I was told would be a routine first-year assessment, Professor Nerok said mildly. I have not been bored. Okay, so yes, Marcus said. I'm going to give it a conclusion. But I need to know something first, and I need an honest answer. The simulation's communication architecture, the layer I accidentally touched when I was feeding it false inputs, is it fully isolated from the Academy's external networks? I looked at the technician. She checked. She checked again. Her expression shifted into something I did not want to interpret. It is supposed to be, she said. Is it currently? A longer pause. There are 3 data pathways that the higher processing tier appears to have opened during its analysis escalation. They are narrow. They are likely just pulling reference data from academic archives. But technically, they are not isolated, I finished. Cadet vein, I said. And I used the tone I reserved for situations that had moved beyond protocol into something that required complete human honesty. Which was an irony I noted internally. What exactly are you planning to do? The simulation is trying to classify me, Marcus said. So I'm going to let it. I'm going to give it complete transparency. Every decision I made, the reasoning behind it, the things I was guessing at versus the things I calculated, the moments I was scared, the moments I was certain. I'm going to feed it a complete picture of how I actually think. Not tactics. Not strategy. The actual process. And your theory. Professor Narok said slowly, is that a complete and coherent self-description will satisfy the analytical function. My theory is that the simulation can't close an unresolved variable if I resolve it myself. I stop being an unknown. It classifies me. Scenario complete. A brief silence. And also I'm the only one who can do this because I'm the only one who knows exactly what I was thinking. You can't feed it the data from up there. You don't have it. I considered this for 4 seconds. Which is a long time for a Velhari administrator and an eternity in a situation with a 41-minute oxygen clock. Do it. I said. What followed was 22 minutes that I will spend considerable time attempting to document accurately and likely never fully succeed. Marcus Vane spoke to the simulation's analytical core the way I had watched him speak to Security Unit 7 in the maintenance bay, not as a system to be manipulated, but as something he was genuinely trying to make understand him. He walked it through the moment he had looked at the Valdris scenario parameters and felt afraid, and then the moment the fear had organized itself into focus. He described the false input strategy not as a clever deception, but as a desperate improvisation born from noticing the pattern and having nothing else available. He talked about the escape pods and the reactor detonation and the broadcast pulse with a candor that was sometimes almost uncomfortable to listen to. Because several of his admissions involved genuine uncertainty, genuine fear, and at least 2 moments where his plan had relied almost entirely on something he could only describe as a guess. He did not present himself as someone who had mastered the scenario. He presented himself as someone who had stumbled through it, one terrifying decision at a time, holding on to the thing he was protecting as the only fixed point in a situation where everything else was chaos. Around the 18-minute mark, the formation of enemy warships on the display screen began to slow its adaptive cycling. By minute 20, 3 of the ships had stopped moving entirely. By minute 22, all 8 had gone still. At minute 23, the simulation's lockout released. The technician made a sound I had not heard from her species before and immediately began running shutdown protocols. The screens flickered. The scenario environment dissolved. The status indicators that had been flashing urgent amber across every panel in the observation deck went, one by one, to a calm and steady green dot, and then the pod's physical release mechanism engaged. And somewhere below us in the simulation chamber, a hatch opened. The faculty meeting that followed lasted 3 hours and resolved very little. There were significant questions about the simulation software, which our technical staff were already examining with an intensity usually reserved for potential security breaches. There were questions about scheduling protocols and how a first-year cadet had been assigned a third-year capstone scenario, which 3 separate administrators were still insisting was not their error. There were questions about what exactly Marcus Vane's performance record should reflect, given that the scenario he had completed did not officially exist in any form the Academy's grading system was equipped to evaluate. His score, when the system finally generated one, read simply, unclassified, refer to senior review, the head of the tactical faculty. A veteran Hector commander who had seen things in 30 years of service that she described as formative. Looked at the score readout for a long time and then said that she needed coffee and left the room. Professor Narok filed a formal request to add a new module to the advanced tactics curriculum, which he was calling adaptive reasoning under complete systemic failure, and included Marcus Vane's session transcript as the primary case study material. I filed a report. I filed a very long, very thorough report. I used precise language and documented everything in careful sequence, and I still reading it back could not make it sound like something that should have been possible. I found Marcus the next morning in the corridor outside the mess hall, holding one of his hot beverages, wearing his uniform with the collar correctly fastened for once. Unit 7 made its small detour and beeped as it passed him. He gave it a thumbs up without looking. "Administrator Seraph," he said, with the easy smile of someone who had slept well. "Good morning." "Cadet Vane," I said. He fell into step beside me, which I had not invited, but had stopped attempting to prevent. "Did I get in trouble?" "That," I said, "is still being determined by people much more senior than me, but probably not expelled. Almost certainly not expelled. Several faculty members are arguing about whether you should receive a commendation. The debate is heated. What do you think?" he asked. I walked 3 more steps before answering. Outside the observation windows, the stars were steady and indifferent and very old, and I found them, as I often did, clarifying. "I think," I said slowly, "that you are the most exhausting individual I have encountered in 17 years of academic administration. I think that you navigate this institution the way a comet navigates a solar system, without particular awareness of the disruption your trajectory causes, and yet somehow never quite hitting anything catastrophic." I paused. "I also think that yesterday you frightened a piece of software sophisticated enough to frighten me, and then talked it into letting you go. And I am not entirely sure whether to put that in a report as a problem or an achievement." Marcus Vane considered this for a moment. "Both?" he offered. "Both," I agreed. He nodded thoughtfully. We walked another few steps in the strange, companionable silence that had somehow established itself between us over 5 weeks of chaos. "Hey, Administrator." "Yes, Cadet. What's for lunch?" I stopped walking. I stood very still in the middle of the corridor, and I thought about 17 years of careful, methodical service and the retirement I had been quietly planning for my 62nd year, and the unshakable professional composure that I had cultivated across decades of dedicated work. "I have absolutely no idea," I said. Marcus Vane smiled the smile of someone for whom this was a perfectly satisfying answer, finished his beverage, and headed off toward whatever the day was going to do to us next. I stood there a moment longer, then I went to find out what was for lunch. Because some things, I was learning, you simply cannot predict. You can only show up for them.